right. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Rojansky, director here of the Kennan Institute. Very pleased to be able to bring you another in our series of really unique independent voices coming from Russia. Today's event is really unique in that these are two individuals very closely associated with household names in Russia and arguably also in the United States, but who themselves are, I would say, only periodically household names, though that may change soon, and we certainly want it, whenever it's the case, we want it not to be so for bad reasons, as we were discussing with Leonid earlier, having been arrested in the context of the campaign. We're going to pose some important questions about what it means to run opposition campaigns in Russia. But first, a housekeeping note that tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the 5th floor, so one floor below here, we have another very interesting and very different event, War, Victory, and Catastrophe Commemoration in the Soviet Union and its Successor States. It's a topic that's not just historical, but of course increasingly current, and it's not coincidental that it's happening in the month of May. Of course, it's the battle of the holidays every May 7th, 8th, 9th, etc., throughout the former Soviet region. And the speaker is Misha Grabovich, who's a historian and sociologist. Let me introduce both of our speakers to you. I'm going to ask them to say a word about the central question, which is, what does it mean to run an election campaign when you know enough, if you're paying attention, to know that you're not going to win? Let me introduce to you first, and I guess we didn't decide in what order you two gentlemen would go. We could do an election. We can do a poll in the room. No, I'm kidding. I'll just introduce Dr. Vitaly Shklarov first. Most recently, he was senior advisor to Russian presidential candidate Ksenia Sobchak. Again, for those of you who might not have been paying attention, she did not win. Dr. Shklarov is an expert on U.S.-Russia relations and an award-winning political consultant and strategist. He lives here in Washington and has worked on both the Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns in the United States. Russian meddling, right? There we go. And then Dr. Leonid Volkov, who is currently chief of staff for Alexei Navalny, who also didn't win, in case you weren't paying attention, was not permitted to run. He was Navalny's campaign manager in the attempt to run in 2008, as well as in the 2013 mayoral campaign in Moscow, where Navalny did run and came in second with 28%. In 2012, he co-founded the Central Committee of the Progress Party. In addition to all of his political work, he's a freelance IT consultant and former chief business development officer at Artec Group in Luxembourg, which is the world's leading manufacturer of portable 3D scanners. Wow, cool. And is founder of a digital rights NGO called the Internet Protection Society and head of the election committee for the Coordinating Council of the Russian Opposition. So let me pose the question again. How do you run a campaign when you know circumstances are such that you cannot win? Who wants to start us off?
Okay. Thank you. The question should be definitely rephrased to how do you run a campaign knowing there is no election? Because an election is an event with an unpredictable outcome where something could change, which could bring some change to the policy, to the country, and so on. So this so-called Russian election is not election in any sense of this definition. It's much closer to what was election in the Soviet time, which had all the attributes. So the ballot boxes, the polling stations, the voters, the ballots, but of course was not the election at all. And nowadays, Russian election is such an event. I think researchers call it an electoral type event or something like this, but not the election. What is the motivation to participate in such an event, or in our case, to try to participate in such an event? Because Alexei Navalny, the leader of Russian opposition, was not admitted to the ballot and didn't participate in the event itself. Let me recall the timeline, the schedule. The election has been scheduled for March 18th, 2018. This year, it had to be officially announced 90 days before the election date, so late December 2017. So officially, the election period in Russia lasts only 90 days, and actually only around 40 days, because there are some preliminary procedures in the first half of the official election period. And Alexei Navalny proclaimed his candidacy a year before, on December 13, 2016, which matches more the style of, well, an American election, an early announcement 50 months before the election day, but is unprecedented and unheard of in Russian politics. No one does that. Especially if someone doesn't know if he or she will be allowed to be on the ballot or not. So why? What's the motivation behind such an early announcement? And the idea is that it was exactly based on the fact that we perfectly knew there will be no election, but there will be a very natural moment of stress for Kremlin, for President Putin, just because Putin can't win anything in this election. I mean, he has everything. All the power, all the money, everything in the country. There is nothing he could win in the course of this event, and still has to participate. There are still some procedures, some routine to be organized. And this creates, of course, a stress and the pressure. And our long-term strategy, our bigger strategy, is to use every such moment of stress, because being put under stress, people do stupid things and all kinds of mistakes, to build up, to grow organizationally, to involve more and more young people into politics, to spread our ideas, to prove and show people all around Russia that, well, everything's completely wrong with the Russian state and it's going the wrong way. That's what we were doing. The election date was a formal reason, and this early announcement was a formal reason to start a campaign. It has been a campaign to get Alexei Navalny on the ballot. We were explaining Russian voters that what is and what isn't an election. That an election should be a competitive event with no preliminary known answer, and to make an election such an event, an opposition leader should be admitted and should be granted television access, so not only admitted, but granted television access, granted liberty to drive a full-scale campaign, and so on and so on. And to demonstrate this, we announced this campaign a year before the official announcement in election and started to build up as if it were a real election, which it wasn't. So we rallied the country twice, inaugurated 84 regional campaign headquarters all over Russia, from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok, or to Komsomolsk-na-Amur, which technically was the easternmost election office. Organized numerous large rallies over the country, addressing actually one basic agenda item. This isn't an election unless Navalny is permitted to run. And I think this campaign has been quite successful because, first of all, we really managed to grow up organizationally. So we had only the Moscow unit before the campaign. Now we have dozens of regional headquarters operating all over the country. We had, well, the number of people contributing to the crowdfunding of our political organization multiplied by a coefficient of 6. The number of volunteers participating in our activities by 5. So it's really a very significant growth for a year of campaigning. And we have achieved also the main goal. We have demonstrated the voters the majority of voters that it's not an election and should not be perceived so. Our campaign has generated some funny side effects, some artifacts. One of these artifacts being the Ksenia Sobchak campaign, which has been totally a product of our campaign. So if not, if the 2017 Navalny campaign wouldn't exist, Kreml would not invent the Ksenia Sobchak candidacy to address the idea that someone representing the opposition should be on the ballot. We have shown the new way to organize a campaign, to organize politically in Russia, and we have actually proven that it's just possible, that people are ready to participate, to engage in political activities, to turn out to street rallies all over the country, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, not only in cities with population over 1 million, but in all cities, in every city, and actually in smaller cities even more than in larger cities. It's one of the most important findings of our campaign was that the turnout in smaller cities was larger than in the capitals when we consider the relative numbers, the percentage of population. Yeah, just because the people in smaller cities are less, even less happy with their lives as in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Well, that was the result. And yes, the main goal of our campaign has not been achieved. Navalny was not on the ballot. Maybe because we didn't push hard enough, or because we pushed too hard and the danger of letting him run was too obvious. Also, of course, I recall the result of Moscow mayoral election where he nearly forced the incumbent mayor Sergei Sobyanin into the second round of the election. But it's still the fact. Kremlin decided for a non-election instead of an election, and the last part of our campaign was to demonstrate it. So we ran a boycott campaign and a large-scale election monitoring or observation campaign, having sent around 40,000 election observers to the polling stations, also to prove that the all official figures of turnout and support for incumbent president are fake, which has been also quite successful. So in many regions, our observers have proven that the difference goes to two-digit percentage between the real outcome and the official numbers. At the end of the day, we came out of this campaign, which lasted well over a year, actually, including all the planning, well over a year and a half, being stronger organizationally, having used this political momentum to talk to tens of millions of people all over Russia through our campaign leaflets, campaign materials, and to hundreds of thousands of people during the rallies in person, having proven to them that, this wasn't not an election, that they have to continue fighting, turning out to rallies and so on, being politically active to demand a real election to happen, which is yet to happen.
Vitaly.
It's a great question. Hello, everybody. How to run a campaign where you know you're not going to win? Sometimes people, on the one hand, take part on Olympic Games and they sometimes don't know that they're going to win or not. They still do it. And the same way, I rephrase it, we know that tomorrow we're going to have dishes in the sink, we still wash them. So you have to clean sometimes the house. And I believe you have to clean Russian politics as well. So you have to take part in the election, even though you know you're probably not going to win, because no action, or passive action, is also not strategy because it leads to nothing. So you should use any election, any opportunity, especially in such a political landscape like Russia, to raise the voice, to reach out to people. Every election is an opportunity to mobilize people, to make people hear more of politics and engage them. As Leonid said already, it's always an opportunity to educate people and build the grassroots movements and train the staff as well, like to build bigger organizations and movements. Secondly, I always say there's always a chance, like there's always the theories from Talib that say you have always a chance. You would never know back then, 2013. I've heard so many people saying Navalny back then didn't have any chance, and 2013 it was a bright movement. They were brave enough to do it, and WUPA, you see like great results. 2017, when we ran a municipal level campaign, I heard all these voices saying this all rigged and it's all Kremlin project, and you guys not gonna have any chance. And all of a sudden we had over 1,000 candidates, first-time candidates, and from all those people, 267 won seats for first time in their life. So I believe there's always a chance. Also, I believe mobilizing voters against Putin is always better than not to mobilize people against Putin, because this way also you're not going to be able to distinguish are those people not interested in politics, or maybe they have different views. So you have to build databases. You have to create those movements and educate people to run campaigns themselves. And I believe, especially in a political landscape like Russia, you have to be, and especially in cultural, in a culture like Russia, in this mentality, you have to bring examples, heroes. Like people love stories. Like if there weren't like 2013 a movement of Navalny, I believe the next following years weren't the same. Like you wouldn't see that many protests and that many engagement. If we didn't have this great campaign last year, so many people wouldn't feel energized and wouldn't take part in different activities. And that makes always hope, and that's why you should run, should always participate, and any campaign is a chance also to master your skills and to challenge the regime.
Let me start. I'm going to get to some of the questions that very obviously differentiate the two candidates that you each worked behind. But starting in the broadest sense, neither movement, neither political movement, despite their differences and commonalities, was calling for a revolution in the streets at this moment, right? The people were in the streets, but you were not calling for like the overthrow of the government through revolution. There are some people who would say that any way in which you kind of play within the system and play by its rules. So, okay, you're going to have an election after serving a 6-year term. Now you're declaring there's a presidential election. We embrace the concept of election. We obviously disagree with the way that you're running it. But even just that premise of sort of granting the legitimacy to the system to accept its rules is already kind of morally wrong, politically unwise. How do you respond to those that say you're playing even too much within the system now? And Vitaly, I know your circumstances are different with that, but Leonid, you start.
Well, actually, we were exactly playing by our own rules, because by the rules of the system, Navalny couldn't be a candidate. Still, we went on a proactive campaign and went on the campaign trail as he would be a candidate and as he would be admittable. So we didn't agree to these rules. We didn't accept their legitimacy. We started to state from the very beginning. So either the election is being organized by our rules, or we don't recognize it as an election. So and that's actually a significant difference to what Vitaly said in his opening statement. So to say that we have to participate in any kind of election. It's better than not to participate. No, I don't agree here. So what they have at the end of the day set up with Putin and some pre-selected, accurately selected fake candidates was not an election, and it was our strategy and moral point that we shouldn't be part of it and can't accept it. So we were not playing by the rules. We were having started our campaign a year in advance, trying to dictate them how this election should be organized. We have tried heavily to dictate our own rules. But that was essential.
Leonid, I'll come to you in just 1 second, Vitaly. If I understood you correctly just a moment ago, you said if they had let you run, if they had actually let Mr. Navalny be a candidate, then he would have been a candidate even in this election. Is that right?
It was just one part of the thing. So we were campaigning not only to let him run, but also, once again, grant him television access, unlimited liberty to organize the campaign, and a number of other requirements.
So if the authorities had said, yes, you can be on the ballot, but no, you can't have the kind of campaign you want to have, and denied television time, denied whatever, then he would have not run?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Vitaly?
Well, they cannot deny the television time. They would.
Of course they can.
No, the point is simple. I believe there's many reasons why I see it a little bit slightly different. I mean, the one thing is to have election in a really well-developed system like Europe or America, where you can presidential candidates on the Republican side, and you have 8, 7, whatever on the Democratic side, and you can choose. And then the voter should decide, do you like this one or this candidate? I mean, we don't have this situation. So Russia is like a burned land. You have a farce election. Make no mistake, it's not a real election. But it doesn't mean that you have to sit around on the couch and wait until magically a perfect political situation arises, and you have perfect institutions, and you have perfect presidential who is willing to take part in debates. You have perfect motivated donors and stuff like that. I believe this time, and this is actually also part of a Kremlin reasoning, will never come. You have to create your destiny yourself. You have to create your today or your future by doing some stuff today. And I believe this is really vital for Russia, especially since Kremlin and Putin uses exactly this lingua, trying to scare people away from election, try to make them feel continuously since years that it doesn't matter what you vote or not, if you participate or not, you're not gonna win, you're not gonna change. It doesn't matter. They make election look like a farce or like a circus with those fake candidates who's been there for 20-something years and just a laughable candidates. And in this sense, I'm not talking about legitimacy because. The state who owns the whole power, the state who owns the whole media, and the state who has the whole authority can put anybody in prison in just a second. So in a way, taking part in the election may look like, Matthew, like you legitimizing process. But do you really legitimize a person who can easily start wars, who can easily, since 18 years, change the constitution and stuff like that, and just pushing through his agenda? Do you really legitimize with a couple of oppositional-minded people, or are they gonna do whatever they plot, and execute the way they want, no matter what? Now, then is the question: are you stay aside and just watch this happening? It's been look, we've been looking for great candidates ever, always. Was Yeltsin great candidate? Was Gorbachev great candidate? How many it doesn't exist. A great candidate doesn't exist. What does exist? I believe a participation. I believe the belief from people that they can change. Without belief, you can bring any so perfect president or presidential candidate to election. And some people, to some extent, gonna disagree with his or her policy and stuff like that. It's a human element, and I believe. revolution as such also doesn't really fit the right strategy for Russia, because Russians are like they're so traumatized. Let's look throughout the history, the revolution 1917, then the First World War, the Second, the Stalin time, the collapse of Soviet Union, the Yeltsin, the Perestroika, and now Putin. They are so sick and tired of change, and change is like literally in their minds something negative. So in order to convince Russian people, in my opinion, you don't have to sell them change or revolution. They are really afraid of change. They're like happy that they can like survive, getting by, and afford the living. You just can, by your own example, by little action, by little examples like kids, teach them the difference. Teach them that politics matters because politics translates in this and this change in your personal life. And when they feel it themselves, when they feel it, when they believe it, I believe then they turn out. You cannot just sell like simple empty rhetoric like election are so important. This is your duty as a citizen to go to vote. It doesn't work. They're like really traumatized. 70 years long, nobody really asked their opinion. They were like ruled. They have problems to take initiative. They have problems like to believe it's gonna cost nothing, and then it's not gonna affect their life. And I believe. In this sense, Russian politics and participation comes down to education, really to education, to teach them that it's okay to run, that it's okay, look what Navalny does, it's okay. Yeah, sometimes people like, have really hard time, and I admire what they do, but look, they're still alive. They doing like, look at this thousands of people running for office. It's possible. Even for first-time candidates like Sobchak, it's possible to run. So I believe this try and error strategy is one of the best principles for democracy. Democracy is never born out of one election, last election. Democracy is a long process, and this young country, 26 years old democracy, just needs this time to develop.
Vitaly,
that's my point.
Look, I just want to stipulate, you both have given good and valid reasons why you should be engaged in what we would call politics. And I want to just say, I'm sure you're both genuine about your reasons, and your candidates probably are too. But I want to get to those we suspect are probably less ingenuous or genuine, and that is the authorities. So Vitaly, why do you think the authorities permitted your candidate to run?
Well, I believe I believe that the young history of Russia, the 91, 93, I believe this common sense of sort of, let's call it democracy, and the perception of politics among Russians means for them that election cannot be so. I mean, you cannot say like this is North Korea, where you can like totally fake everything. So I believe there's a general belief in democratic, more or less democratic election, and people see the legitimacy as at least election process. So people are gonna always take part in elections. More or less the turnout, this is the second question. So I believe the authorities, of course, need and the Kremlin need this legitimacy for the West, for themselves, because they also partly afraid of putsch, because they're partly afraid of people who gonna get on the streets. And I mean, 2013 and years after show that up to 200,000 people can be on the streets. And for Putin, for sure, the prime examples of regimes that were like changed through the street, to the grassroots activity, is the best prime example what he is afraid of. And I believe in this sense, they wanna have, in a way, like fake election to show like, okay, we really have this support. Because look at this presidential race. It wasn't race about Putin. It wasn't about candidates. It was about turnout, like to show that people support him. Mm-hmm. It's not about candidacy. Mm-hmm. And in this sense, every candidate, every even little competition, like helps them as well, of course. Okay. Now the question: are you going to use it or not as a right?
Okay, Leonid, I can tell you're jumping to say something. Can I add a question, though? You're welcome to respond, but let me add a
Absolutely.
question, which is, why is Mr. Navalny still able to do anything? I mean, running for president or not running for president, the authorities have the ability at any point to shut him down.
The authorities have the ability to do anything to pretty much everyone in Russia, and this being almighty doesn't denote being not rational. They are, of course, rational. They have not lost their mind. It's a cruel mind, but still a solid one. And they're definitely considering the upsides and downsides of every decision, of every important decision they make. And actually, we know quite good that every important decision is escalated to the top level to President Putin himself. The only reason why they don't, arrest Navalny, send them to prison again, is that they, at this point of time, decide that the downsides overweigh the upsides. That's the only reason.
What are they afraid of?
Two things: his popularity to grow and people out on the streets. So people on the streets, it's definitely the only thing they're generally afraid of. This has been proven on an enormous number of occasions, and they, at least consider that, arresting Navalny will really drive people to the streets, and also increase this general notion of injustice in everything which happens to him. So it has been already such a buzzword, but still I would repeat it. They don't want to make a Mandela out of him. It's definitely their strategy. It results in very funny things sometimes. So my last two arrests were for a retweet of Alexei Navalny's tweets, for which he wasn't arrested. So, which sounds a bit strange, but for Kremlin, it's definitely a very well thought through strategy. I mean, arresting Volkov will not ignite mass street protests, while arresting Navalny might.
Let me, yeah.
And actually, the question about legitimacy is kind of like interesting in for the case of Russia, because Russia is a heavily authoritarian regime with a lot of state actives and state property. So you can pretty much call any, or 80%, 70% of companies, of organizations who work within this system, unless they really like terroristic organizations and act against the law, part of this regime as well. Because you cannot change this regime within a day or two. So you have any change starts little by little. So you have find the ways within the regime, within this political landscape, find like wind or sun or water, like in a stone, little cracks, and trying to hit in those cracks until you find the niche and can fight like David against Goliath. And otherwise you just gonna wait and until best days, maybe generations, until best days for political activism arise. And I believe this is a false strategy.
What about the? I mean, take the idea of kind of water seeping into the stone through the cracks to another level. I remember asking your candidate when she was here a couple weeks before the election. Theoretically, if Mr. Putin asked you to serve in his cabinet after the election, or in the prime minister's cabinet, would you do it? And she said yes, on the same theory, the theory of change from the inside. I guess my question is, how far do you go with that, right?
This is the question. The question is, how do you define collaboration or cooperation with the regime? There's like two types of cooperation. You can cooperate while you like becoming part of a government and part of this clique of corrupt bribers of their own government, or you can cooperate within a system while you live there and take your action and try to keep it low profile, not to be like jailed or killed, but still move things at a little. So it may seem insignificant, but at the same time, I ask a question. Like last year, we won big time. Like we ran 1,000 campaigns simultaneously, and 267 people won seats. Now the question is it a big success on our side? Yes, but at the same time, would be the government, the Kremlin, able to shut down this person easily? So I believe, therefore, I believe within the Kremlin there are people who are also willing to have change, who are also sick and tired maybe of the regime or of a status quo. So I don't think the Kremlin is like just one-sided. I believe there's a lot of like circles of interest or like points of power that reasonable people who also want support actions like that, who doesn't want to like break regime through revolution, through blood and like collapses, but slowly and steadily develop the country to the point that well, we have great examples, all former Soviet satellites like Poland, like Baltics, like so many countries who could peacefully but steadily develop. Sure, different government, different maybe approach and stuff like that, but still it's possible. So I believe within a system that is unbelievably corrupt and aggressive, there's still some centers of interest of change. Now, how big they are, this is the question. How powerful they are to execute something, this is the question. But make no mistake, like if the government, as Leonid just said, like if the government is willing to imprison you, they can do it. The question is, why didn't the authorities anything against a municipal level campaign? This is the question. So I believe the regime and Putin also realizes that this stagnation, this economical downgrade can last for so long, and then it's going to be real collapse. So I believe, and it's his strategy to get new people in the government, I believe, so sort of a approach of renewal or like slightly to change the status quo and maybe to upgrade the government. Of course, it's not gonna happen because as long as you don't have free media, as long as you don't have like a functional court system, as long as you don't have all these institutions working, and as long as you have corruption in the government, nothing gonna change this solution. But it's still a process that needs to be like we need to start it. Like at which level doesn't matter right now.
Leonid, as I'm sure many in the room are aware, there was a very famous YouTube discussion between the two candidates a few days after the election. I think maybe the day after.
It was on the election night. But
on the election night.
I don't recall it very good because I was in jail.
Okay, okay. But probably you've seen it since then.
No.
No? Okay. Well, let me summarize. Ksenia comes to Alexei.
Yeah, okay, I read the summary.
So the basic message was, hey, Alyosha, let's work together, get lost.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I probably it's time to make a statement, a small statement, but it's really important. I'm not sure. I have to apologize. But I'm not sure it will be easy to understand in this audience, being used to what American politics is. And it's really complicated to understand what's Russian politics if you're not inside, but it's still important. So when this event has been announced, quite many of members of my staff.
This event,
yes, of the Navalny campaign staff wrote me a Telegram message. God thanks, Telegram is not blocked in Russia, unlike any other internet tool, asking me not to participate because they described the idea of comparing Navalny campaign and Sobchak campaign in terms from disrespect to insult. So I have great respect for Vitaly for what he's done on the municipal campaign. It was really great. And it's funny that every question on the Sobchak campaign, he starts with Sobchak campaign, but then moves to the municipal campaign and their success. Because probably even he's a bit, well, ashamed to speak of the Sobchak campaign. Because what we have done in 2017 was an anti-Putin campaign. It has been dangerous to Putin. It faced an enormous opposition and oppression. The campaign staffers spent altogether over 4,000 days in jail, and were subject to over 16 million rubles in fines for their legitimate political activity. While the so-called Sobchak campaign, which was a completely fake show, has anticipated only encouragement from the government. And it has been from the very beginning orchestrated and financially motivated and motivated by Putin, because after Navalny campaign has proven that there should be an independent candidate in the election, but they decided it's too dangerous to allow Navalny to run, they decided to create a fake independent candidate for this election. So, and my campaign staffers wrote me that, well, participating in this is at least a disrespect to, well, my chief of staff in Tambov, who is arrested today for 10 days, again, just to miss my fifth rally and so on, so on. Because when we compare them, we kind of try to say, well, this was one campaign, more radical, this was another, more moderate, and let's discuss which is best. There was an anti-Putin campaign, a campaign to get a real election to the country, and there was part of Putin's campaign to orchestrate a fake election. That's a very important statement, and that's why I don't want to discuss in terms of comparison of the campaigns, and that's why Alexei told Ksenia to get lost on the election night, because she has to get lost. Actually, what she did, because while our political activity continued as it was after March 18th, our regional networks operates. We are preparing new rallies, starting new projects, because the presidential election was just an episode. So our campaign lasts for 7 years. Well, I worked together with Alexei since 7 years. We built up organizationally, getting stronger and stronger and stronger, despite all the opposition and obstacles from Kremlin, and using every reason, like in Moscow mayor election, State Duma election, now the presidential election, or another stupid law, or any kind of injustice, to talk to people and to explain to people what's actually happening in Russia. And this March 18th, 2018 was just an episode, and we are continuing steadily working on what we were working since 7 years. And Ksenia has got lost after March 18th completely, having played her role, having been well paid for playing her role in this circus. That's all. So it's I'm sorry, it's probably a bit too harsh or even rude, but it was very important for me to stress that.
Yeah, please, Vitaly.
Yeah, quick. So I took a really active part in this Sobchak's campaign, and first of all, I want to stress I can state it like firsthand. Nothing was orchestrated, or I wasn't paid or orchestrated by Kremlin. This is simply
how
not
do
true.
you know?
Well, that's the point. You don't know. I believe this polarization, like Navalny against Sobchak, who is better? I believe it doesn't do any good for Russia. I believe, like the more candidates we have, the better it is. I believe Sobchak for first time talked. Let's give you one example. Talked for first time to Russian women. There wasn't any candidate before, presidential candidate 6 years ago, or now who was like really actively talking to women. That's important. We also had a really successful campaign. We registered 120,000 people on a website. We opened 50 free offices, collected over 100,000 signatures, and I believe criticized Putin probably along with Yavlinsky, like non-candidate, presidential candidate right now. And look, right during the campaign, we sued Putin. We went to Chechnya. We went to United States right after the sanctions were announced, while none of the political governmental officials was able or brave enough to face harsh questions here in Washington, D.C. and face people and talk about meddling and stuff like that. And I believe, like also during the presidential conference, basically to ask Putin, particularly Navalny's question, and like talk about his brother, about prisoners, and get Dmitriev out of a jail. We did a lot. I believe within 5 months, within this system that is there, we did quite a lot. And I believe, and I have to protect in this sense Sobchak. I believe she did what she was able to do, like to talk about Ukraine and LGBT rights and stuff like that. Now, how much of an effect or how much of a success it was, well, we all know. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to do it. It doesn't mean that she is in a way like a competitor to Navalny. I strongly believe someone who is loyal to Navalny and appreciate their work like I do, will never change the side. Like someone who loves a soccer team A will never, like just because of some emails, databases, or like some new game, not rapidly change a side and switch to a different team. I believe it's important in democracy to have many faces. Democracy has to have many faces: female, male, like old, young, and stuff like that. So this polarization, this radicalization, if you wish, of political oppositional process within Russia does serve actually and help the Kremlin to divide those people, to divide those different actors. And at the same time, I totally understand the position of Alexei, which is like in sports, politics is like sports. You can, like, you have some sports where you compete one against one person, like boxing or whatever, but you have also team sports, like where you cannot be a successful soccer player when you play for yourself. Like you have to build teams, and this is the probably the philosophical questions or the personal question: how do you consider the politics in Russia right now? Is it a team play? Or exercise, or is it like one-on-one sport? But this is totally normal to compete in politics, like Vitaly, I said.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment, and I want to make sure that I want to get one last question to both of you, and then we'll turn to the room. Politics in Russia is not like sports in at least one important respect, which is, of course, that in sports, people generally don't get arrested and they don't get killed. And so I can see, therefore, why Leonid and Alexei Navalny have the kind of moral argument, and many of those who support them sort of, even having the conversation is an indignity. But I guess there's another side also to this argument of what is at stake, that it isn't like American politics. One of the reasons why Americans are so comfortable, often American government officials will say to, authoritarian leaders or just leaders in the world who lose an election and who maybe aren't sure they should leave power, we say, just go, just leave power. In much of the rest of the world, it's not like America. You leave power, then you do a book deal, then, you get a cushy board gig and so on, and you become a millionaire, right? It's not like that. In other parts of the world, like, you disappear after you lose power. One of the things that's at stake, I think, in general with opposition politics in Russia, is people are afraid of what happens when someone really takes on the authorities, that it can get bloody, and a lot of people can suffer. And an interesting argument was made at this table we had a panel of Russian kind of political analysts just a week or so after the election. And an interesting point was made at this table that, look, if you're a serious and sort of civically minded person and you go through the effort to go to the polling place, you sign your name on the ballot, you show your ID, and you're going to vote, and you look at this list of candidates, then you really can only vote for Vladimir Putin because you're there, in a sense, out of a sense of civic responsibility. The last thing you're going to do is vote for someone who wants to kind of blow things up and create chaos and so on in any direction. So the question I have for both of you is, in your different campaigns that you ran in the different contexts and the different kind of basic approach, what can you do to appeal to more Russians, to a wider swath of Russians who maybe are actually afraid and are not? It's amazing to me how many Russians are not afraid, by the way. I do think that's something that's been proven in the last decade with street protests and everything. But what can you do to get to more Russians who at the end of the day basically are like, yeah, I don't like things, but I don't want to rock the boat because it can get bloody and it can get bad?
Let's start from the end, probably. First of all, unfortunately, maybe, but the thing that really helps is that so many Russians are now really having nothing to lose. So we have rallied enormous amount of small cities, which are usually considered not to be of any political activity. Really small cities, I mean by Russian measures, but like the cities with population of 200,000, something like this. Very distant cities. There are only two types of street ads in these cities. The first one are the so-called microcredits, so the loans, that you repay like with your next salary, and where the efficient interest rate is about several billions persons a year. And the second type is lawyers that help you to get rid of such loans. There is no more other street ads in the cities. People live in enormous poverty and feel this and feel the enormous injustice of the system and inequality in redistribution of national goods, and they really have, pretty much nothing to lose, which can really lead to very unpleasant consequences, the revolutionary and bloody ones, but it's the situation that Putin has created. It's very complicated to talk to these people on one hand because it's really desperate people. On the other hand, it's kind of quite easy to talk to them because they really get your talking points. We were talking a lot to these people, and there is no Putin's majority in the country. It's wrong. But you made a very good point that a normal person just having a look on this list of candidates technically, rationally should vote for Mr. Putin, because this is how and why this list of candidates has been selected. A number of clones, a number of well-known freaks, such that Mr. Putin looks like real an island of stability, dignity, and healthy mind among them. The actual composition, proven number of times by our polling and all kind of field research, we invest quite a lot in field research and polling, shows that it's of course a very rough numbers, but to give a feeling, a perception, 10% of the voters are real Putin supporters, like people who hate anyone who doesn't admire Putin. 30%, and it's pretty much the same in Moscow or Smolensk, in Ekaterinburg or in Barnaul. There is no more difference between large cities and smaller cities. Among 30% are people who realize that everything is wrong, that the government, the country, the state is broken, that this country needs the reinvention of the state, the rebuilding of all the institutions from scratch, and that's the only way. And 60% who have learned, and this is the main success of the propaganda and the main result of the last 20 years, have learned to be disengaged in politics. Who think politics is a dirty thing. It has to be done by specially trained people. We don't have to participate. And there is no dignity in any political engagement and so on. So Putin's campaign was, and all the numbers and results have proven this, only a turnout mobilization campaign. So those 10% of supporters turned out, and those 60% of people who generally don't participate in any election and in any kind of political activities were a target of an unprecedented, a very massive pro-turnout, not pro-Putin, but pro-turnout campaign, thinking this is a presidential election, happens only 1 in 6 years, now you really have to go and turn out. And as these people are disengaged in politics, they have seen this list of Mr. Putin and 7 clones, and generally they voted for him. That's how it was designed, and in this sense it was a technological success for President Putin and his team. But this proves nothing. This doesn't prove that he is a national leader uniting everyone in the country and has an anonymous popular support. It is just not true.
Okay.
Then and the last, I'm going from back to the beginning. The last thing is that really, politics is about moral values and moral things, and especially in Russia. So where really, people, the last 20 years have been spent by propaganda to creating the wrong attitude to politics. It was especially important to talk about values, ideas, kind of moral things. And in this sense, it was absolutely clear that it's not a moral thing to participate in this election as a candidate, as a voter, as such, after the independent candidates have been cut out and this election has become a circus. And it was also important, also for the integrity of of our message to the people, to the voters. And it was not complicated to talk to this majority. Our campaign from the very beginning, and that's why it has been so dangerous, has been a majority campaign. It was not a campaign that targeted 2% of well-educated city intelligentsia or 5% of them, which could be a strategy for a Duma campaign where you need just 5% to get your representatives in the Duma. It has never been successful yet, but it could be a strategy. But our campaign was a campaign that targeted the majority, so of those feeling injustice, poverty, and corruption in their everyday life. And in this sense, it has been very successful. We have seen that really tens of millions of people reacted to it very positively, and so it became so dangerous. While the attempt to deal with the Russian election as with a real election, and select issues to talk about, let's talk women's rights, is morally not sustainable. Because it's not actually an issue. Putin is an issue. The monarchy is an issue. The injustice is an issue. And we have to get rid of Putin first and to talk women's rights. It's just the only possible moral position in my mind.
We recently marked the 100th anniversary of the Russian revolutionary process. And of course, one of the exercises in that process is to analyze, as my colleague Will Pomerantz and others do here, kind of where the different layers of change lined up. You know, some of them were conversations about, well, what should be the role of women in the modern Russia? And of course, you know, it's like, well, we have to get rid of the autocracy first, right? Kind of amazing 100 years later, we're kind of still having this conversation. Vitaly, I'll just give you just a couple minutes. I want to make sure we get the audience in.
Yeah,
I know you have to respond to some of it.
To your question, like, what are the strategies? I unfortunately, I just see those strategies. They quite obvious. So you have to wait until this system collapses, and then you're gonna inevitably come to the second option is revolution. So which also gonna follow after collapse, or you have the third option is just engagement and this typical evolutionary way. And I don't think truly, this is my personal, of course, opinion, and each person, each political actor has to choose the right strategy for him or herself. But I don't believe that that the revolutionary way gonna be the most successful. I don't think that people gonna believe in it. I don't believe as well that Kremlin people and corrupt politicians gonna freely give up the power. You know, I don't believe it. I don't believe that. Then for opposition is, or for so many people is, what at stake? You ask, Matthew, is winning campaigns. But for those guys, just try to get in their brain. Like for those guys, it's like winning or like going in prison. So you don't have much of options, you know, like, and I don't think they're gonna freely give up the power in the same way like the oligarchs not gonna be freely and happily giving up the money. But why I'm saying like I believe the more candidates, the more elections is the better. Is just like look at the perestroika time, like Gorbachev is a prime example of something like that. That stuff can really quickly happen in Russia. Heavily communistic bureaucratic guy elected by Communist Party, you know, like elected on the communistic ticket, came to power and helped with other ideas, with small, like maybe like different strategy coming to power, but then rapidly changed the Russian approach. That's why the Russians hate him, actually, and so many people in West love him. So I believe if we create many, like thousands of Navalny, Sobchak, Gudkovs, and stuff like that, I believe the change gonna slowly and steadily come in this way, or ignite sooner, you know, like in terms of revolution or collapse. But you cannot just sit and hope and expect those guys to give up what they have. I don't believe in this like waiting for perfect situation strategy.
So just a very short note. It's just short. You can't create thousands of Navalnys. You can't create Navalnys. Navalny isn't created. Navalny is Navalny because he has been indicted several times, because his brother is in prison, and because he still continues to do what he's doing. It can't be created. You can't create independent politicians. They have to.
Well, look at the political process in the United States. Some action, like for instance, like Bernie created a Bride movement on progressive ticket, and so many people. I talk about creation in this sense: give people the opportunity to run for office, educate them, engage them, not just like for one party, for one particular agenda, but like on broader issues. Like let it be women issues, let it be LGBT, whatever. I believe in a broader coalitions. You know, like not just like. Of course, you cannot create. Everybody is individual and unique, and of course, nobody can be as successful in the near future as Navalny. I'm not trying to take his achievements away. I'm just saying by creating, like, trying to think out of the box and trying to talk to people differently, politically differently.
Okay, we have just 20 minutes left. We have a lot of hands up in the room. So ground rules. We have 2 microphones, one on either side. Please wait for a microphone. Keep your hands up so that I don't forget who you are. And then just introduce yourself and your affiliation if you have one. And please ask a question with a question mark, and please keep it civil. Okay, so let's start with the woman right here in the light blue jacket.
Good afternoon, Maria Snegovaya, Center for European Policy Analysis for Russia Foundation. I have one small question for each of the participants. Thank you very much for interesting discussion. So Leonid, you mentioned the boycott strategy. I'd like you to estimate the success of the boycott strategy, given that actually the turnout in this presidential election was higher than the one in 2012, which didn't involve the boycott strategy. And the other question to Vitaly. Vitaly, how would you explain the failure of Sobchak's campaign? She actually only got 1.7%, which is below 8% that Mikhail Prokhorov, the other oppositional candidate, got in 2012 election. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Nice and short. And
Okay,
keep the
I'll try to keep it short as well. So the boycott campaign, the voter strike campaign, has been a success because, first of all, we have demonstrated a lot of proof for the enormous falsification, rigging of turnout and election results. Second, because we have proven once again that the voters are not fools and they are not gone. So 30% of Navalny in Moscow 2013, 30% for Roizman in Yekaterinburg, about 30% in central districts of Moscow for the municipal, for independent candidates in the municipal election. This is our 30%. They didn't turn out for fake candidates, for Sobchak or Yavlinsky, because they are not fools and because they realize it's not an election. So they are smart. They can distinguish between an election and a fake election. And our voter strike campaign has stressed this difference.
Okay. Vitaly.
I do not consider it as a failure. It's really hard to consider something as a failure or success when you sometimes it's not about the question how much of percentage. It's how you do it and what you achieve in a long-term goal. And I believe to start from zero to become the number 4 candidate in the country in some districts or some cities like St. Petersburg, number 3 in Chechnya, number 2 in foreign countries like Austria or Germany, even number 1. I believe it's a successful first-time candidate for a woman running for office in Russia. Don't forget that. This is really, really important because of patriarchal society. And secondly, of course, what about 140,000 people registered, tons of visits, 53 offices. I believe what we achieved within 5 months, it's tremendous. Thirdly, you cannot compare, Maria, Russia 2013 and 2012 and Russia right now. There was no Ukraine. There was different Russia. There was a different movement in the air because of Navalny, because of a protest on the street. You didn't have all these sanctions and stuff like that. I believe, and by the way, Prokhorov being definitely a pro-Kremlin candidate with 12 times as much money, as much as I understand, because one of his, not one, but his campaign manager was taking part on our team as well. So spending so much more money and being pushed through Kremlin to legitimize the election, I believe it's just we live in a different reality. So in this sense, of course, 2% or 1.7%, it's not a big of achievement. But sometimes you don't think in these categories how much, but how. And how I believe we mastered really well.
Okay. Let's go to Katie right there. In the, I don't know, brown sweater. I can't see.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I'm Katie Fox from the National Democratic Institute. Thank you to both of you for really just a fascinating presentation. My question is to follow up on your question about how to appeal to a wider swath of Russians. Can you reflect on what you saw when you were out talking to people at these rallies, particularly the 60% who are disengaged? What gets those people off the couch, as we say? Is it a local issue like payday loans? Is it a national issue like Navalny made these videos about national level corruption? Right. Is it some kind of values-based appeal? What was your experience, and were you surprised?
Generally, what gets them off the couch is injustice, in a broad sense. Something that it's really, perceived as a strong injustice. Kemerova, the fire not the fire itself, but the media and police lying about it and trying not to say something about it. Sometimes something very unexpected. I mean, you can't predict that this event will ignite and this will not. Sometimes you don't understand that. But in a broader sense, it's injustice.
Inequality. Injustice, inequality, yeah. Like this unbelievable, deep sense of like lack of fairness. I believe that motivates. And of course, stagnation, economical stagnation, and lack of jobs. That hits really hard people, and you can write on those topics really well.
Okay, Mike in the gray jacket. I'm going to stop with colors because these are really bright lights.
Thank you. Mike Pesner, U.S. Senate staff. Thank you very much to both of you, and especially Leonid and your boss for the courage to operate in the current environment in Russia today, but really to both of you for this discussion. I wonder if, question to both of you, if you could dig down a little bit deeper into the kind of polling. Obviously, we had the election, but I think digging into what you alluded to, Leonid, in terms of the stratification in the Russian electorate, and we're seeing consistently Mr. Putin have popularity of over 80%. I think I saw a Pew Center poll that actually strongly support his ability to handle various issues has actually risen, obviously, since Ukraine. So two-part question is, are you seeing those polls, and do you disagree with the 86 or so %? And then number two is, I'm trying to understand why the Kremlin and Mr. Putin would let your boss, or would not let your boss run, because it seems like if you believe those numbers of 86%, and he ran, with all due respect and credit, that would be the best way of discrediting him as a political force, as opposed to making him into a martyr-like figure.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's been one of our strategical ideas, that they will be so persuaded by their own figures of, well, 86% support, that they will let him run just to demonstrate that he has a mere 2% of support, to swipe him from the political map. But unfortunately, we already had a preceding experience, because we started the Moscow mayoral campaign with our own polling in 2013 has shown Sobyanin has 75%, while Navalny has 3%. And you know, it ended up with 45 to 36 in exit polls, and 51 to 28 in official results. Very, very close to the second round. Because there are different situations. If people are asked whom you would vote for, whom do you support, without the context of an election, and during a campaign or because of the campaign. During all 2017, we were building up an outreach machine. So our 210,000 registered volunteers are our media. We don't have television access, newspapers, radio, and even on internet, our ability to operate is very restricted. So we have recruited the volunteers to operate as our media, to outreach to their relatives, friends, elder people, and so on. And we have proven that this outreach machine could be very effective. We have proven it during the Moscow mayoral campaign. So probably they just didn't want to test it again. As far as our own polling has shown Putin's favorable, well, not in the 80s, but in the 70s. Because, well, once again, when people are being asked generally, do you support Putin? They prefer to answer yes. It's quite a complicated thing to make a polling in autocracy. It has some strange effects on the numbers. And our prediction, the prediction of our polling service, well, I'm not really independent here. My wife is running our polling service, but our prediction was exactly correct. So we have all the numbers of the official results. We predicted them within the well within the error margin. So we predicted the 76% for Putin, which they have demonstrated as official results. Does it denote that Navalny would also get like 2% or 3% of votes? No, I don't think so, because campaign is what changes everything, because it makes, well, people think about the issues really important to them. And our campaign was about the issues really important to people.
Why? It's a good question. I believe on the one hand, so many people, like first of all, just think of Russia as a perfect created machine, like a perfect created monster for just one particular goal, to keep the power. So if you have the goal to keep the power, and if you have unlimited resources, you have unlimited media resources, you have a society that it's heavily dependent on government, who's been raised generation after generation this way. So it has also a lot of cultural roots, why Russians are the way they are. So of course Kremlin uses this strategy and trying to portray Putin or the current government as the only possible and steady and successful president and administration. And they have been doing this for 18 years. And I mean, guess what? They got really good at it. So they all the media is every single day, 24/7, just hammering the same message. Also for so many people who is in my generation and older, who witnessed the 90s, the collapse of Soviet Union, the high inflation, and Kremlin uses this rhetoric also really successful, portraying and saying look, you guys, with Putin era, you became a better life. And indeed, if you look back in the 90s, people were lining up for bread and sometimes some butter, like in a war. And all of a sudden, they had the first car or microwave or flew to Turkey for vacation. So I believe all those reasons that Kremlin uses really strategically to make them inexchangeable and the only possible option. They say, who else than Putin? As if in a 150 million the biggest country on earth, there's no one more effective manager of government. Government is just a management job. And in this sense, of course, this propaganda does a lot and makes people believe that all this wealth did not come from high oil prices and corruption and stuff like that, but came through Putin. And that's why they demonize the government, they don't demonize the administration, but they love Putin. And that's why he ran this time also independently. He totally went away from United Russia Party, to make all this really look distinguish. Here's he, he's great, and what is really wrong with Russia is actually two things, corrupt people and the West, who makes us suffer. And in this sense, also sanctions and all what happening with U.S., Russia, or European Union and Russia relation plays unfortunately also towards him and helps him to sell this propaganda as if it's all not the fault of the economy, not the fault of bad management, not the fault of corruption, but fault of some external reasons like US or like Europe and stuff like that. So, and that's why people mostly support them, because they don't have also access to new information. That's why it's important to run campaign and educate them, to show them. And look, in the system of in the court system of Russia, for 1,000 cases of court cases, there's just 2 or 3%, I believe by now even lower.
It's
0.2% of yes. And people just don't believe it. Like they really believe what's happening in Ukraine. It's true, and they just fooled and sometimes also do not really wanna get deeper in stuff. And I believe that makes Kremlin successful and want to be 86%. I, by the way, also don't believe that he has 86%. But that being said, I don't think if we had really good polling that or like really fair election, Putin wouldn't win. I believe this time around he would still win. Maybe next time not.
Okay, we have time really for just one more question. So let me go right here. I know you had your hand up earlier. Yes, and yellow. I think it's yellow. Just wait for the microphone. And if you can keep it short, maybe we can squeeze
Valerie
in a couple.
Bunce, Cornell University. I want to ask both of you whether you have studied opposition campaigns that, much to everyone's shock, actually succeeded in regimes that are similar to Russia, such as the color revolutions.
Great.
No, I didn't. I studied computer science.
I studied two successful things. In a way, the success of Saakashvili in Georgia, I found it really fascinating. But make no mistake, it's just 3.7 million people against 150 million people. So like in a country as small as Georgia, it's easy to implement those changes. You can kick out 81,000 police and military officers, fire them and still survive. Like stuff like that in Russia, in current Russia, would not exist. So make no mistake. And secondly, in a way, I believe the grassroots campaign of Bernie Sanders was a huge motivation for me, because someone who's been for 25 years saying the same stuff on the Senate floor wasn't taken serious, and all of a sudden there's this grassroots movement, I believe, to ignite and to motivate so many young people, like from the bottom. I believe it's also a prime example of how it could work. But once again, it's the United States and it's not Russia.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left. 2 hands up. Ask the questions really quickly. I don't think we could do 3. Right there, gentleman in blue and in black. I'm sorry.
Hi.
The answers have to be quick.
Hi, my name is Dmitry. My question is primarily for Mr. Volkov. It's about the 2024 election, and what can you do in the meantime to increase the chances that Putin leaves power? And is there a way for that Mr. Navalny or you yourself see that happening? Just what are the mechanisms? Is he going to face criminal charges? Can he leave without facing criminal charges? And what you can do to make sure he leaves power in 2024? Thank you.
Okay, and pass the mic to the gentleman here in black, and then...
My name is Wei Wang. I would like to know, is it possible that the Russian government would adopt some measures used by the current Chinese government, like the social credit systems, like the internet firewall, to control, not only to control, but to change the behavior of the general population?
First to the second question, they would love to, but they actually trying it pretty much since 2002, and in the way of this, they have couple of times already stolen all of the money they have budgeted for such a system. So I don't really believe they would even succeed. For the first question, well, I see it as a highly likely that Putin will not run in 2024, but our political activity is not defined by the elections. They are important milestones, as they are points of very natural points of stress for the regime. But since 2011, our strategy is to build up, to grow our network, to reach out to more and more people, to find new tools. Like YouTube was not in our inventory before 2015, and now it's very essential for us to be organizationally grown up, fit, ready, to take over when it happens, because it can happen by any reasons, dependent on us or not. Some huge injustice which would drive millions of people out of the street, or just some very natural biological course of events, or some internal struggle and instability. We don't know how the Putin's presidency will end, but we have to be ready to this moment of time. We have to be grown up and strong as an organization, and of course we have to do everything we can do to make this moment closer. That's all.
Lena,
this is a strategy.
Very quickly on that point, can I just ask, having labeled this group as żuliki, youre. Is there any way that Navalny would ever signal, sort of, I think, to Dimitri's question, that, oh, you don't have to worry, we won't put you on trial, if you lose power?
We have stated quite openly that Putin and, well, his family, under some circumstances and conditions, can get immunity in exchange for a peaceful transit of power.
Okay.
Collaboration with the regime. I believe, to your question about the internet and firewall, I don't think it's possible. We had with Leonid today, the Department of State, the same conversation. The Chinese internet was set up differently, structured differently than the Russian, and in Russia, I believe 76% is spread at the internet use. I believe it's just impossible technically to do so. They will, take some point-pointed actions, like right now with Telegram or something like that. So, or like they did with Navalny website years ago, and I believe this will continue. But just to block the whole internet, pretty much unlikely.
Well, gentlemen, that was really a fascinating discussion. I want to thank you both. This is an important topic. You handled it admirably, and thank all of you for being with us and for your questions.